everybody, welcome back. It's Christina again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a Cooper's Hawk. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, here's the Cooper's Hawk. So we've got several colors going on. We're going to start with the white, especially because we're going to need to get this kind of in. Right, so the white kind of comes down. There's some brown mixed in here. Right, we have the beak coming right down. It's just one line in front of the other. I've kind of sketched out some of the color changes. But like when I do that with any cat, right, it can be tricky to figure out what I was doing when I was doing it. So just making sure it all kind of makes sense. And getting the white in will help. You know, this is kind of another sketching step. Sometimes I'll skip, this is a sketching step and just jump right into adding highlights and shadows. But this is a case where, it's needed. Because there's a lot happening, especially once we get over in here, that we'll need to sort out. So for the most part, it's just, lightly filling in the white. I'm not putting a ton of pin pressure. I am changing the direction I think the feathers would be going based on, where it is on his face. So it's sort of getting that feather direction correct. It's getting the coloration and where that coloration is happening correct. Especially as we get into more of these densely packed kind of areas over here. And then a lot of the magic will happen once we add the highlights and the shadows. So this is still just a sketching step, sort of a secondary sketching step. And Cooper's Hawks, while these seem simple, because they have some coloration, some striping and stuff, can make it a little bit more complicated, but also just sort of leaves room for a more artistic, you get to play around a bit with some, extra lines and doing extra things and adding effects or whatever else. So, and then, you have the beak up here that runs into another color. And then this, we have white right here, but eventually that turns into roughly around this area. The light will become a light brown instead. Right, so just following the striping. Nice and easy-ish. Ish being the key word there. So it's going to transition, let's see, right around here. So I'm going to get the rest of this white filled in, which is going to be below this kind of like line here. And I'll be right back. So I think we're going to do the light brown. Well, and by I think, I mean we are. Going to get the light brown in. The light brown is also by the eyes. Right, there's some yellowing here too. And then it has a darker brown going around it. Still following that contour that I think the feathers would be going as much as possible. And then we'll have that dark brown kick in, and there's some gray, the yellow of the beak. The eyes are like red. for Cooper's Hawks. For adults, they're yellow in juveniles, but red in adults. Interesting color. So I haven't actually selected it yet. I have to puzzle at it and see what's going to work with whatever I've finished once we add highlights and shadows. But again, mindful of feather direction here, right? So here it's kind of going a little bit more straight up and down because it's going to swoop up before it turns. And then it turns, and you would follow that contour. So the light brown is just in these areas I've sort of separated out, just sort of made some squiggles. So I'm going to finish the light brown up and I will be right back. All right, you're actually kind of getting the feel that it's a bird already. Okay, so now we'll go for that darker brown. So there's a little bit over here, and then it kind of pops out where the eye would have been on the other side that we kind of can't see because his face is turned. Right, it's still following that contour. Butts right up to the edge of the beak. But still kind of that same idea. Right down here we're going kind of up and we follow the contour of the head as it turns. So I'm going to fill in the dark brown. Partially down into here, and then I'm going to transition that to some light and some dark brown. But for now, we're gonna fill in the dark brown all the way down to this line, basically, where we transition the white to the light brown, and then we'll work out the rest of that. And right down here, we're still pushing up, and you can see we transition quickly. But okay, so I'm gonna finish out the rest of the dark brown, and I will be right back. All right, so down to that little section. I'm going to be filling in some of this with the dark brown, and some with like a lighter brown. So we'll do some of this with the dark brown, and then some with the light. So all of this would probably be nice and dark. We'll complement that with some light brown through here, some dark up in here. Light brown, I think it actually becomes a little bit grayish back here, but I didn't indicate that, so I guess we'll be doing it this way. Right, we'll have some of that as light brown. We'll have all of this as dark. Some of that is light. So I'm leaving gaps for the light brown, kind of filling in the rest. We'll have dark brown through here, some light brown there. Dark brown, we'll do dark brown here. So if I go back to some of that light brown, we'll have some light brown in here. Nice little section. Some light brown here and here. Basically any of these gaps and then transition that to the light brown, mixed in with the white. And then once we add the gray, it'll really kind of all start hopefully coming together. Well, the gray and I guess the yellow of the beak. And then we'll figure out the red of the eyes once we add highlights and shadows and everything. Get sort of an idea of the coloration. Find a good sort of muted red. You don't want anything that's, I mean, eyes are the first thing we see, but you don't want anything too crazy that's going to stand way out. Right, there's not a lot of the brown over here, just in a few spots. So if I take off that sketch layer, that's how we're looking. And we could probably make some assumptions and fill in some gaps. A few spots. Some of it's just gapping where I didn't connect it all the way. I'm going to get the gray. I'm going to use the same gray for the tip of the beak as well. Gray is, pretty straightforward. It's just kind of down in here. And just make sure that I'm on a separate layer. Alright, so all of this is gray. And it kind of swoops up over here, swoops down over here. Right, you have the gray coming down this way, up that way. And then it kind of changes direction, goes down into the beak. Pushing over the beak and down. So it's a lot more straightforward. There is a transition point, I'm sure you saw right down here, right where the feathers are going in different directions once they get to that area. Common in birds because they have, sometimes right by their beaks, right here in this section of their faces, they'll have smaller, shorter, more downy-like hair. Cooper's hawk, it seems like it's still pretty long and flowy, but, or at least some of it is, but it still has some of those qualities to it, right? And then, as I mentioned, the beak. Oh, I am going to add some gray on the back. I forgot I was going to do that. I think some of it would have gray, from what I remember. Okay. And then the beak, right, you just sort of follow the contour of the beak down to the tip, and then I usually just push up from the tip. It's not a perfect point, but it's not completely rounded either. So I'll just come off the tip, make sure I have that nice controlled stroke, and then above this point the beak is yellow, but to this point down it's like a gray or black. Gray, really, I guess. Down about here, and then right we see that transition with the beak. So just being mindful of that contour, right? As it rotates itself down, we rotate it down. So, and it's underneath. So this swipe, oh, that was a bad brush stroke. This swipe down here, also gray. Not a big area, and we're changing the direction because, well, the contour of the beak would be different. So I'm going to finish out the gray on the beak here, and I'll be right back. Okay. Well, there's no doubt that it's a hawk now. Okay. So we're gonna go with the yellow. There's some yellow skin by the eyes. Oh, there's some black though too. Yellow skin by the eyes. Let's try that again. And I'm gonna create some contour by pushing it up and down. Right, it's just a matter of like swooping up or down with my pin. All the way under. Right, it's not a big space, but it's a little bit. It'll look dramatically different with red eyes on it. And then just like a smidge right up here. Right. And then on the beak, we want to follow the same kind of contour we were creating before. Same yellow. Shouldn't take long. We just have the nostril to be mindful of. The only difference really here is that the color has changed. Otherwise, well, there's probably a little bump as well. And the gray pushes into the beak here, right? So creating space for that to do that. And if I need to, I can fix it. That's easy enough. Just erase it out. Right, so we'll create the gap for the nostril. That angle's changing as the beak is rotating down. Again, we have all of that where the hair is pushing in front. I might need to erase out some. And then following that circle contour back up. Same thing here, right? That hair, the very least, this layer should probably be underneath the other. That way the gray can shine without interference. And then likewise under here, same thing. All birds' beaks kind of come back like this. You have almost that little like grin happening. Grin? I don't think that's the right word. Where the mouth comes back. It usually connects with a circle, but it's hidden by the gray feathers. Alright, and so that's what we're left with. It's a pretty good start. Alright, so now to sort out light source, so I'm going to have it coming from above and to the left. I'm going to start with the yellow since that needs to be under this white, as opposed to when I sketched it and did not have it under the white, or the gray. So the yellow should be nice and quick, but I'll have the light source coming from above and to the right means it's above and in front of, right? I'm not doing it next to or behind. That'll give the most chance to illuminate the subject since he's looking off to the left. Now all edges are in shadow, right? So even this edge over here would be in shadow, but not a lot before it kicks into highlight. So to do the shadow, it's just light pin pressure, sort of filling that in. And then to connect it in, I find it easier sometimes to keep the light pin pressure and just add a lot more lines. And you can see what that does. I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure, but the extra lines really brighten it up quickly, and that lets me blend it a lot easier. And then as I come over this way, I can start putting full pin pressure into the nose because I no longer need to blend it. It's just that the full pin pressure makes the lines thicker. And so the thicker lines can be hard to blend in where I have thinner lines where, you know, there's shadow. Right, so just that full pen pressure in. I think the rest, no, not under here, just kidding. Huh. I was gonna say the rest of the beak is gonna be in highlight. It's also not true because the top of the nostril will be going into shadow, and probably a little bit on this side, but then you're gonna have a getting into highlight because it's coming out of that recess on this side, probably a little bit over here too. So we need to blend all this in as well. And then under the beak, right, just like I did before, as I come over to the beak, I'm using more lines to brighten it up so I can blend in that little bit of shadowing I added. And I'm doing that a little bit into this gray as well, so that'll make it easier for the gray to stand out when I'm putting full pen pressure. And just following the lines I've already done, right? As the beak twists and turns. Following those lines. Now, I'm making sure that this is all nice and blended. As we come under, right, so there's going to be right under here where the top of the beak meets the bottom of the beak. There's going to be some shadowing. And then underneath the beak, there's going to be some shadowing. That was a little bit of hard pen pressure, that's okay. So there'll be some highlight, but I'll do the whole bottom section in shadow for right now. That'll be easier to determine where that highlight's going to kick in. And some of that might be determined by what I do with the gray. I'm just debating on if I should fill it in all right now or leave it and see. I'm going to push this yellow just a bit. Might be too much, but we'll see. And then I'm going to give you just a little bit of highlighting through there. We could probably do it actually. Right, like you're going to have some highlighting as the beak comes back out of the recess in the mouth, right? And then it's going to go immediately into shadow underneath. Okay, so there's the yellow, and then by the eye, you know, as it's dipping down into the eye, you're going to have some shadow from the feathers over top, and then some highlight, right? Still doing that texture. As we come down right against the eye, away from the light source, shadow, but on the opposite side of the light source against the eye, we can do highlight because it would be picking that up, right? And then as it swings underneath, you're also going to have some shadowing and have that connect into that highlight that we created. And then up here we'll do some in shadow. This is on that back side. Okay, so nice and easy start, and then we'll do the gray. That'll get the beak all set, and the hair, or the hair, whatever it is, the feathers. You gets it, you gets it. Same thing, right down where it's connecting in, shadow. Shadow down to the tip of the beak. This whole tip a little bit in shadow because it's aimed away from the light source. This edge in shadow. And then underneath, right, this would be casting a shadow because you have the beak blocking the beak. And then underneath, also shadow until that highlight kicks in. Okay. And the rest of this can be highlight. And just like before, blending it in, so just using more lines to blend it until we get far enough over where I can put more pen pressure. So I'm going to get the rest of this done, and I will be right back. All right, now for the feathers up by the beak, right, this is full pen pressure. I want this pushing up and over. I don't think there's anything, might be like a little bit of shadowing up in here, but for the most part, all of this, all of the remaining gray is highlight. So that's just that full pen pressure. And that's down into, I think this is all that gray, isn't it? This is where sometimes it helps to know what I have drawn and where I have drawn it. Yeah. Okay. So through here, yeah, so the rest of this should be highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of this done, the rest of this gray on his face, and I will be right back. Probably going to go with the dark brown. There's some gray on the back too. I'll worry about that later. Same thing with the dark brown as we talked about with the beak, right? Like all edges are in shadow, so this edge by the light source would be in shadow, but not much. And then you're mixed in with the light brown, right? So just sort of skip hopping and jumping my way across his forehead. And then as we get to the back, you're going to have bigger shadow. And you don't have to stay within a confine, right? It's a bird, so the feathers coming off the back, totally fine. Giving myself a little extra room to blend it. That's what I call giving myself a runway. Sometimes give myself a runway in order to make it easier to blend. And then we have that gray coming off the back. Now, unlike, when I'm drawing other animals, usually when I get to the bottom, you're at a bottom, right, where you're at the chin or whatever. And that's not the case here. So once we get down in here where we're actually pulling away from the back of the head, there potentially isn't a need for shadow. However, I have found that when you do portraits like this, sometimes it is easier to just put it in shadow, even though it wouldn't be. It visually helps us. I don't know why. It just does. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of that. And I'm probably going to change up some of this and add some more light brown mixed in. But, all right, so then that full pen pressure, right? Full pen pressure, only more lines when we come over here. Right. As we blend it, and then back to full pen pressure once we pull away. So, I'm probably going to add some, I'm going to flip this to a light brown. Here, maybe here, a few extra spots than I did. Otherwise, I'm going to maintain this darker color. So I'm going to finish this, Actually, I'm going to do one quick thing else in shadow, and that's just this little swoop here. Not much, just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to do everything else in highlight. So I'm going to get the rest of this dark brown in highlight, and I will be right back. I'm going to add in the light brown. And see, this should, see how this looks. We're going to put the light brown here where I had previously had some brighter, or darker, brighter. A lot of this highlight, some of it will be shadow though. Right, it's just sort of the contour of the of whatever I'm drawing, this thing, of the hawk. Right, over here the edge, shadow, obviously. And then here we have some shadow. I'm going to fill in these gaps that I also left. That'd be highlight. It's a mix of white and brown. See, we're starting to transition into shadow here, so backing off that pin pressure. A little bit here too. Just have to find the spots where now that dark needs to become bright. So just like before, I'm gonna shift this. That's not just like before, that's I'm changing because that contour of his head changed. Well, it didn't change, I changed it. Right, but the edges of the head, shadow. But the rest of that's going to be highlight. I'm going to fill in where the dark brown is with this light brown, and then when I come under here I'll talk about that. So I'm going to do this with the light brown, and I'll be right back. Alright, I think that covers it. So then we have the beak would obviously be casting some shadow here, right? So you have light source coming from above and to the left, you know, above and in front of. And as that's casting down, beak would probably be casting a shadow somewhere in this vicinity. So this would probably be fine. And this would be fine. But some of this up here would not be. As I mentioned, sometimes going into shadow at the bottom, even though there wouldn't be shadow down here, can be surprisingly helpful on a composition like this because I'm cutting it off. So just adding a little bit of shadow on the edges, even though there wouldn't be. But this would be highlight. Some of this coming into highlight. Right, all up in here. None of this would be blocked. Some of this down here would still be highlight, and then I just need to figure out exactly where I'm cutting off where his beak's shadowing. So it's coming from above and to the right, it's coming down, so we'll say here, shadow, 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 shadow. Starts in shadow and then goes into highlight here. I'd say the same for this one. Starts in shadow and then goes in highlight. It'll make more sense once we add the white. Yeah, okay. So then we'll add the white. Because now we really will have to be mindful. Right, you have the beak coming down, so all edges in shadow, so even though beak isn't casting a shadow here, this would still be in shadow because it's the edge. And then the bottom, which wouldn't be in shadow on this composition, but we're going to do it in shadow anyway. Going into that highlight, especially between the brown there. Probably have this in highlight. And then transitioning this into shadow. And that's going to follow the beak almost all the way over. As we start coming over here, that's going to start brightening back up because we're going to clear out that edge. And we'll be back in highlight. So then, depends on the angle of the beak. Right, you have that dip that's coming down. And then matching what we've already done, so we're going to go back into highlight through here because that's what we did on the brown. Because it's swooping a bit. Right, but this in shadow. Have that kind of angling back up. So highlight, so it's just a matter of figuring out. And the white is just going to be filling in everything else we haven't filled in, minus the gray on the very back. It's white, so it's a little easier to do. Because white, a brighter color, is easier to put on top of a darker color. Because it's brighter, it's going to kind of overtake that color, which is what we want in this particular case. It's going to be easier to blend it. All right. Oh, I missed a brown. Right, so then blending this back in. Right, because you would have a somewhat extreme change here. So now we're making some minor adjustments because I'm probably going to have to get that brown again and just shift this ever so slightly. And then all of this solidly highlight. Because since I shifted the highlight with the white, I've got to shift it with the light brown as well. Right, this wouldn't be casting a big shadow, so making sure that readjusts itself. Yeah. So let's get the beak in and then we can discuss the rest of that. Just blending this in. And then again, that edge, just backing off the pin pressure will be a little easier. Doesn't have to be like a, you know, nice clean edge, just an edge. Yeah, see, we're gonna pull this up a bit. Now that it's in, I can see it better. And we can readjust as needed. Yeah. So I'll fix the light brown to readjust what I did with the white. But for now I'm going to finish out the white and I'll be right back. Going to just do that light brown real fast. And then go back to the gray. Right, this is highlight. And I missed this guy completely. Alright, so then this is kind of highlight. You're going to have this kind of being highlight. A little bit of that. Some of that. Yeah. I'm just filling in gaps. Now, back to the gray. Mostly just going to be shadow for the gray. Yeah, because it's all on the back side, so all of it's going to be shadow for this section of gray, not for the gray. I added at the beak and the face, just on the back of the head. Okay. Now, they have red eyes, so gotta sort that out. Just a few spots that were extra dark because I didn't actually fill them in. Just making sure it all looks kosher and blended along the same line. Okay. Now they have red eyes. I'm gonna add a little bit more white and gray kind of coming to the back. Not much, just enough, because the angle certainly would help indicate that it's, you know, would help hide some of the back of its head, but it would be turning more gray on the back. And I just want to make sure that's somewhat clear. That the brown is not the dominant color down in here. There's a mix of other things happening. Yeah, I think that's good enough. Okay, now. So red. It's so weird when animals have like a red eye color, because it's not pink, but it's not necessarily like a dark red either, at least not usually. So finding like the right balance of color can be tricky. That might not be bad. I'm gonna pop this on though and give myself a little bit of a leeway. If I need it, I can undo. Okay. So first things first, I'm gonna draw in the pupil. Yeah, okay. And then, you know, go around in a circle kind of around the pupil. But not at the top. We're going to see if that works. Sometimes with birds, I do have to do the top because it's so much I'm leaving untouched. But as, you know, as you bring it down, you go from the pupil and you kind of angle it downward. That edge, if you're going to just cut it off like this, create kind of a loop down instead of a loop the other way. Right, you're following, what's happening is the top of the eye is casting a shadow. That's basically the reasoning there. And then you just fill in, you know, all the way around in a circle. So I'm going to get the eye filled in real fast, and I'll be right back. I'm not sold on this color yet, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so then I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool, I'm going to select the pupil, and then I'm just going to erase any stray lines that are in there. I'm going to select and inverse it, and then fill in any gaps by the pupil, since the eyes are the first things we look at. And what I'm typically going to do is change the direction I'm drawing, because that'll be the best chance to alleviate any gaps. Creates almost a cross-hatched effect by the eyes. Not exactly that, but so if I deselect it, have a nice sort of clean pupil happening. And I'm going to take out this one little stray line. Okay. For now, we're going to stick to this color. But again, I'm not sold on it, so we'll see how that goes. And I may fill in a little bit more of this. Right. So I'm going to have a burst of color, burst of highlight on the opposite side of the light source against the pupil, right? Because the pupil is a recess into our head, so as it comes back out, it's going to catch that light. And then on the side of the light source, you're going to have a light that comes all the way underneath the eye, right? All of this. All of this. And then the edges are in shadow. So fill it in all the way underneath. And then the back side is also in shadow. See, I'm backing off my pin pressure as I come to the edge. And then up in here, as it goes into shadow up in here, that's in shadow as it starts sort of tapering off, basically. Again, I may change that because it, just like with other birds, there's a whole lot of real estate here of sort of untouched. Right, so we'll just bring this around. If I do decide to bring it around, the side I'm doing right now, this back side, is going to be brighter than what's in the shadow up by the top. But I'll have a better idea of exactly how it's going to look after I get it all the way in. Right now it's looking like it's too much. You know, birds, especially when I zoom in on them like this, and especially on like predators or owls, you know, their eyes are so big. On smaller birds with smaller eyes, you can get away with it. But sometimes there's just too much. The shadow that it's casting wouldn't be that deep, and so I have to make adjustments. Because the darker, you know, the darker the shadow, the deeper the recess. That's sort of what it's telling our brains. Right, and so I'll blend this in and then take a look at what's happening. Right, blending in, I'm just using more strokes, not more pin pressure. And then we can brighten this up because this is all underneath, so this can just get a nice burst And then again, making sure it's blended at that edge. We can brighten this up by adding more lines. And then of course by the pupil, this is in shadow, or more shadow than the area that's in highlight. You know, there's different degrees of shadow. Some of this would still be bright though. Making sure to kind of blend it in case I decide to leave it as is. And then, you know, we can just keep blending in, adding more lines and blending in until it looks right. Because we can brighten this backside up just a bit. Not a ton, but I mean, we don't want it as bright as the front. But it can be brighter than it currently is. And like I said, if we need to, I can brighten up even more. Just adding in more lines, filling things in more will brighten them up more. His eyes are so big, it's just taking a little bit more time to get it. Which again makes me think I'm probably going to have to do more than I did. Finish out that top. Yeah, I think we're going to need to do that. So it's going to be in shadow. Much deeper shadow than everything else we've done. Following that edge like I already have. Same thing on this side. Just pull that shadow up, and then it'll be just a matter of blending it in. Making sure the pupil is nice and clean. Really backed off pin pressure. Also choosing how many lines I'm putting. So being mindful of all of that. So you don't want to see, like you don't want to look at something and be like, oh, this is clearly like the line between light and shadow. You don't want to be able to tell that. And just continuing on that circle. Alright. It's okay if it starts dissipating a bit. It's further and further up there. Yeah, and then you have the shadow, and it's still an extreme shadow. It's just not as extreme as it was before. And then I'm just brightening up to blend that eye a little bit better. And then of course we want this to be nice and bright as well. All right. So the last thing to add then is the light flare. I'm going to take the elliptical Mach-E tool, going to make a selection in the eye, push it into the pupil, make sure it's down into the area that's got highlight and not up in the area that's shadow. Edit, make sure I'm on the right layer. Edit, fill with the foreground color, which I've already selected to white. and then deselect it. And I can move it as needed if I think it's too prominent, if it needs to be shifted. You know, you can kind of change where he's looking a little bit, but you don't want to push too much in. I usually do half and half, but you can shift and change as needed. Alright, so that's how you draw a Cooper's Hawk. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.